Well, thank you, Frank, and thank you, the Commonwealth Club, for inviting me to speak here tonight. On a sunny and dusty afternoon in October 2000, Justice Sandra Day O'Connor and I had finished our work for the day in Mongolia. While we were heading back to our hotel, she said she wanted to go for a camel ride. That didn't startle me, as I knew she grew up on a massive cattle ranch in Arizona and felt most at home being a cowgirl. We had spent a week together developing the rule of law in Mongolia, a program funded by USAID. Our work represents the essence of what I did abroad for 30 years in more than 45 countries, strengthening democratic governance. Because Justice O'Connor was equally devoted to advancing the rule of law during those 30 years, we became both professional colleagues and personal friends. I'm going to talk today about my passion developing the rule of law in former communist countries and other emerging democracies. I'll take you on a journey funded primarily by USAID, during which I witnessed the absence of the rule of law and its consequences firsthand. My goal is to demonstrate through my work abroad that the preservation of our democracy is paramount for all Americans, regardless of political belief. For that reason, my remarks are intended to be neither partisan nor political, and I hope they resonate with the diversity of views from the left to the right represented in this audience today. I'm pleased you're here because I, like many other American legal professionals who did similar work, have worked as volunteers in obscurity. Few Americans knew about USAID program of funding democratic reform in countries worldwide. The U.S. government believed USAID was in its own self-interest to ensure that other countries became democratic in order to advance our own security and economic interests, and to expand America's influence in the post-Cold War world. I actually had a different purpose. I went abroad because I wanted to give back. I wanted those who were born in a communist country to have the same privileges and the same freedoms we Americans have. We were fortunate to be born in America. And I was reared that even though I was more fortunate, I am no more deserving than any other person. Now, my friends, however, never truly understood what I was doing, and particularly where I did it. Hearing that I was volunteering to work in former communist countries, many of which they couldn't even spell, led several of them to think I must be in the CIA. Why else would I work in such countries and not get paid? It didn't make any sense to them. Some of them are here right now. I'll tell you why. In 1989, I watched with fascination the dismantling of the Berlin Wall. Never in my lifetime, and I suspect in some of yours, did I think I would witness the collapse of Soviet-style communism. How could societies reared with a belief in Marxist ideology shove one political system aside for the emergence of another at full speed? How could millions of people accustomed to state subsidies of housing, food, employment, medical care, even vacations, suddenly assume the burdens of freedom, taking responsibility for their own lives? At the moment I had these questions, the American Bar Association was creating a program, ABA-CELI, Central and East European Law Initiative, that provided American attorneys the opportunity to work pro bono in former communist countries. How fascinating, I thought, to participate in the birthing process of democracy. Justice O'Connor also thought that, and she became the first member of the executive board of ABA Sealy. As for the extent of our work, does anyone here have an idea of the number of countries that transitioned overnight from communism to democracy after the fall of the Berlin Wall? Anyone want to guess? Very good, it's 29. 29 countries. And in case you can't name them all, although perhaps you can, okay. Yeah. There were 15 republics of the former Soviet Union. Russia was just one of the republics. The others, Ukraine, Moldova, Belarus. The Baltics, that's Latvia, Lithuania, Estonia. The Caucasus, Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan. The stands, as we fondly call them, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Uzbekistan, Tajikistan, and Turkmenistan. 6 republics of former Yugoslavia, Serbia, Croatia, Slovenia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, Macedonia, Montenegro, and later Kosovo, which was a province within Serbia. 6 Central European countries, Bulgaria, Romania, Poland, Hungary, and Albania, and 2 new countries that were once part of Czechoslovakia, the Czech Republic and Slovakia. All 29 countries during the same period had to undergo massive legal reform. New constitutions had to be written to create a system of government based on the rule of law, separation of powers, with a focus on an independent judiciary and the protection of human rights. Laws that formerly gave power to the state had to be sacked and replaced with new laws based on democratic principles and economic reform. ABA Sealy, through the volunteer services of 5,000 American attorneys, judges, law professors, and legal scholars around our country, assisted in these former communist countries in their legal reform process. In 1993, I wanted to be where the political action was. This is an opportunity, indeed a lifetime challenge, I thought. And at that time, I was practicing land use law in San Francisco, living on Russian Hill, and had, on the weekends, trips to Napa, visiting friends who had private vineyards and tennis courts. I agreed to work for ABA Sealy and Bulgaria for 6 months. I moved to Bulgaria with the idealistic fervor of a 1960s Peace Corps volunteer. I arrived in Sofia filled with hopes and dreams, but all I saw were gray skies, dull and dilapidated buildings, potholes large enough to sink trucks, and horrific emissions from buses and factories. During my first month in Sofia, I had to stand in food lines. I was only able to buy 2 types of cheese. That's all they had. I suffered through extremely cold temperatures in my apartment. Even though it was the beginning of winter, Sofia's central heating system had yet to be turned on throughout the city. At that time, heating was not privatized. Once the city turned on the heat, it remained on 24 hours a day throughout the rest of winter. The only way I could regulate the heat in my apartment was to open the windows during snowstorms. Now, this may sound intolerable to you, and I completely understand. But I didn't choose this work for the comforts of home. Otherwise, I would have never left. I wanted to make a difference in Bulgaria. Along with a handful of other American attorneys, I was sought after by eager Bulgarian judges and attorneys and law professors with a myriad of requests involving judicial reform, reform of the legal profession, and improvement of legal education. Could we help judges develop a legal training center? Could we teach members of the Bar Association about private practice, something attorneys had forbidden to pursue under communism? Could we provide guidance to a law school dean seeking to design a curriculum on the U.S. Constitution? Could we review draft legislation for parliamentarians struggling to align their laws with Bulgaria's new constitution? I loved this work. We American attorneys felt like we were pioneers in building democracy. Although this is embarrassing to admit, I silently called myself Mrs. Jefferson. The Bulgarians I worked with were euphoric to be rid of communism and to receive the legal assistance that American attorneys provided. We worked so well together because we had a common goal. Because of this unique and exciting work, I unexpectedly found my passion. I extended my 6-month commitment to 1 year in Bulgaria, and then spent the next 4 years working pro bono for ABA Sealy, living 1 year each in Latvia and Slovakia, and a total of 2 years in Ukraine, Kazakhstan, and Croatia. I just couldn't get enough of this exciting work because I knew I was living during an historical time, and indeed it was. After my 5 years with ABA Sealy, I returned to San Francisco in 1998. A decade later, I moved to Afghanistan to work as the justice advisor at the U.S. Embassy Kabul for almost 2 years. When I wasn't living abroad, I was home-based in San Francisco, working as a consultant, developing democracies in Asia, North Africa, and the Middle East. Over the past 30 years, I have witnessed how the absence of the rule of law and threats to judicial independence can undermine democratic systems. And that is why I'm here today. These days, everyone hears the phrase rule of law, but few truly understand it, even some politicians and pundits. They frequently use that term, and yet a clear understanding of the rule of law is essential in order to grasp its growing vulnerability in many countries today, including ours. According to the ABA, the rule of law is a set of principles for ensuring an orderly and just society where no one is above the law, everyone is treated equally under the law, and everyone is held accountable to the same laws. There are clear and fair processes for enforcing laws. There is an independent judiciary, and human rights are guaranteed for all. In every country where I worked, the rule of law was susceptible to manipulation because of the absence of strong institutions and the absence of accountable leadership. Laws were applied unequally. Ordinary citizens were punished while powerful figures evaded prosecution in all of the countries I worked. The contrast was most stark in Afghanistan. The detention centers and prisons I regularly visited in my capacity overseeing U.S. assistance to criminal justice reform were overcrowded with individuals, poor individuals, detained or imprisoned for petty livestock theft, while government officials, tribal leaders, and warlords faced no consequences for embezzlement, for kickbacks, or for extortion. Excuse me, I need some water. In most countries, police corruption rather than the rule of law was widespread. Traffic officers routinely stopped cars to seek bribes in many countries where I worked, Georgia being one of the most egregious countries. I have friends who worked in Georgia. I experienced this firsthand when a police officer in Ukraine falsely accused my driver of speeding. And the driver mentioned, well, I was American, and he was hoping it would shame the officer from seeking a bribe. Instead, the officer demanded a larger bribe. Well, if she's an American, she could afford more. My driver refused to capitulate, and we drove off. But even with the police officer's outrageous demand, and even if my driver had paid the bribe, the officer would most likely have avoided prosecution. While on a short-term assignment in Serbia, I met Tanya, a young, idealistic shop owner, proud to have become an entrepreneur, like Americans, she said, selling her own creative clothing. She had just been shaken down for protection money by thugs who promised to safeguard her shop from any foul play. Tanya refused to pay because she trusted the country's newly established commitment to the rule of law and that it would deter them. It did not. The next day, Tanya's shop was destroyed. This was a recurring pattern in many countries where the law exists more on paper than in practice. In Bulgaria, I avoided walking near black luxury sedans. In fact, I would cross the street immediately when I saw a black luxury sedan parked. I was fearful because such cars were commonly associated with perpetrators of financial fraud. Because law enforcement was so ineffective, drivers of these cars in several countries, Russia being another one, were frequent targets of retaliation. Victims did not turn to the courts. Instead, they took justice into their own hands, sometimes assassinating the driver with a card bomb. The rule of law was largely non-existent in these countries during the early 90s. Teachers, school administrators, medical professionals could be bribed to favor certain students or patients, granting grades or giving medical care they did not deserve. Government officials, driven by very low salaries, resorted to questionable behavior simply to survive. What was worse? It's that the perpetrators of any type of criminal offense knew their chances of prosecution were slim. And even when offenders were prosecuted, the judiciary, meant to uphold the rule of law, was often compromised. This is why ABA-CILI attorneys were tasked with helping to develop judicial systems that functioned as equal branches of government, not subservient ones. And that's where I focused most of my time. Unlike in the United States, where judges are usually seasoned lawyers, in many European countries, law school graduates can begin serving as judges at a remarkably young age. I observed judges in their mid-20s presiding over cases where both prosecutors and defense attorneys were often twice their age. Under communism, the separation of powers among the three branches of government did not exist, and the law was not supreme. Instead, power was concentrated in the Communist Party. Judges were accountable to the party, not to the law. Governance was determined by the arbitrary authority of the individuals, and the law was subject to their whim and caprice. Under communism, judges were considered puppets of the government and became accustomed to party leaders who would routinely call them and advise them how to rule in particular cases. This practice became known as telephone justice. all it took was just one phone call. Well, this reminds me, when I was in Croatia, working with the judges there, and they said, facetiously bragging about their progress as a modern country, they told me that their telephone justice has been digitized, and they began to call it SMS justice. Since the rule of law was absent under communism, judges who resisted telephone justice faced the loss of benefits, demotion, even dismissal, while those who complied were rewarded with tangible advantages. Now, as we all know, a judge should be guided solely by the facts of the case and the applicable law, free from external and improper pressures, whether the influences were external or from within the justice system itself. In many of these countries where I worked, the chief judge of each court wielded immense influence over the other judges, holding private meetings to discuss the outcomes that should be decided in certain cases. This practice was a legacy of the communist period, when courts were expected to satisfy the Communist Party's demands rather than operate independently. Laws changed easily, as we tried to do in the beginning of all these countries, but habits do not. In the United States, we often equate judicial corruption with bribery. But through conversations with numerous judges, I learned firsthand how judges abroad and their decisions could be distorted by favoritism, safety concerns, political pressure, or career incentives. Corruption in the judiciary is not always visible. It can be quiet and insidious. For instance, judges abroad were often pressured to issue improper rulings out of fear for their own safety. And one judge I had a very long conversation with in Kosovo, Fatos, wonderful man, but he confided in me. We were in his courtroom the day after he had to make a certain decision. He confided to me that he feared for his life the day before after acquitting a Serb defendant accused of killing a Kosovar. The evidence failed to support the conviction. The case arose just after the Kosovo War, when there was intense hostility towards the Serbs. When no protection, he had no protection, no car, and no safe passage home, he had to board a public bus, and he was paralyzed with fear for simply doing his job. I met many young judges throughout all the countries where I worked who believed they could serve the new democracies with integrity. I shared their enthusiasm and worked eagerly to support them. But after just a short time on the bench, their optimism often faded, and it broke my heart. Many judges, like Katerina in Serbia, were consumed by disillusionment. She confided, tears streaming, that legally sound but unpopular decisions can bring public vilification and could threaten her future. She wanted to become a Supreme Court justice, and yet she knew it would be dimmed if she issued the correct decisions. She never told me how she ultimately decided most of her cases, but I suspect that she, as well as so many others, chose self-preservation over duty. When I began working abroad in the early 90s, even under such circumstances, my American colleagues and I were able to make a tangible impact on the development of the rule of law and an independent judiciary, largely because our voices as Americans were respected and heard. The United States was seen as the shining city on the hill, popularized by President Reagan, for we were the gold standard for the rule of law, and judicial independence. Today, public approval of the U.S. Supreme Court is nearing a historical low, with 51% of Americans viewing the court unfavorably. American judges have faced physical threats designed to intimidate them. In recent years, some federal judges received unordered pizzas accompanied by menacing messages that the sender knew where they and their children lived. More tragically, in 2020, a disgruntled lawyer, as I'm sure most of you remember, murdered the son of federal Judge Solis while posing as a delivery driver. Such threats aimed to pressure judges can distort justice, undermining both judicial integrity and the rule of law. Today in the United States, unpopular court rulings, even those issued by the Supreme Court, are increasingly met with public scorn, eroding confidence in our judiciary as an independent branch of government. Rather than recognizing the two fundamental approaches to constitutional interpretation, originalism, which relies on the intent of the Constitution's framers, and living constitutionalism, which adapts the Constitution's broad principle to contemporary issues, many Americans today believe that legally sound but unpopular decisions are driven by judges' political leanings or financial interests, rather than by the facts of the case and applicable law. This public perception has placed our justice system today in a downward spiral that threatens the very foundation of our democracy. Now, my work came to a screeching halt early last year, as it did for thousands of Americans and foreign colleagues, both in the United States and abroad. USAID, which had funded us, was dismantled, its budget slashed, headquarters shuttered, emptied of staff, and the services it had been providing since 1969 were abruptly terminated. USAID led humanitarian and development efforts worldwide for the purpose of saving lives and enhancing the quality of life for millions of people abroad. USAID's humanitarian programs centered on health care, fighting polio, HIV/AIDS, and malaria, tackling food insecurity, and reducing poverty. While estimates differ, even a modest calculation suggests that hundreds of thousands of people died following USAID's dismantling, 2/3 of them children. USAID's development efforts included education, environment protection, enhancing economic growth, and promoting democratic reforms, the areas we American attorneys worked on. USAID was also established, in part, as I mentioned, to address the national security challenges facing the United States. With its civilian presence in numerous countries, through USAID's offices worldwide that were staffed by Americans and local staff, USAID exercised soft power that complemented our military's hard power with its boots on the ground. Together, they helped to thwart other countries, particularly our strategic rivals, China and Russia, from exerting their influence. Today, because of USAID's absence abroad, China has rapidly expanded its influence, primarily through large-scale infrastructure projects in countries that USAID exited, such as Cambodia, Nepal, Central Asian countries, and Africa. Today, I, like many of my ABA-CELI colleagues, feel a profound responsibility to share with the public just how precious the rule of law and an independent judiciary truly are. We know their value because we witness their fragility up close. I watched brilliant committed and deeply ethical judges and lawyers struggle under relentless pressure to compromise their principles. And sometimes I felt their anguish as if it were my own. Americans today cannot take our rule of law or an independent judiciary for granted, as I did 30 years ago. At that time, the rule of law in the U.S. was so pervasive that it felt like the air we were breathing. I believe it is crucial that, that all Americans, not just lawyers, understand the deeper meaning of the rule of law and an independent judiciary. Though these principles are not named directly in the Constitution, they are derived from it, and we hold them sacred. They serve to protect every individual in the United States. It is essential in America that every voice, no matter how objectionable it may seem to others, is protected under our Constitution. Today, perhaps more than ever, these two principles can serve as a unifying force for a nation severely polarized by political ideology. They have the power to bring us together, no matter our religious beliefs or our political views, because our most fundamental rights, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of the press, freedom of equal protection, due process, are safeguarded by the rule of law and an independent judiciary. Protecting the rule of law is an active, ongoing responsibility, not a passive expectation that we once assumed. And why I'm here today, ironically, is doing exactly what we American attorneys once advised citizens of former communist countries over the past 30 years to do. Engage with your communities, speak with local organizations, write opinion pieces explaining why the rule of law and an independent judiciary are essential to our democracy, especially in today's toxic political environment. Now, to give you a sense of our work, I'd like to take you on a brief journey through my professional and personal experiences abroad, using a visual retrospective to highlight the democratic reforms American attorneys pursued in the early 90s. With USAID dismantled, its website no longer exists. There is no record of 6 decades of its work. Its history has effectively been erased, and therefore I'm going to use my own website. While the photos and texts reflect my personal experiences, they also serve as a historical testament to the extraordinary efforts of thousands of other attorneys, American attorneys, who worked around the globe. Justice O'Connor once praised the efforts of ABA Sealy's attorneys, saying they will be able to look back on their lives and know that the work they have done has made a difference in the world. I am striving to do the same today so that America's democracy continues to set us apart as the shining city on the hill. Now, I'd like to turn to my website. So because USAID was dismantled, I decided I had a lot of free time, so I created a website. So I'm just going to talk about the first 4 pages, and I guess I don't have too much time. But there'll just be a brief overview, and if you're interested, you can take a look at the text and the photos. This first one, it's of course the home page. There's 2 things I would think you could be interested in really seeing, and that is, one is a video of the speech I gave at the ABA annual meeting in San Francisco in 1997, and it says in much more detail what ABA Sealy did in the early days. The second one is video that was of a radio interview by the Legal Times in Afghanistan about my work. Now, why I think all of you may be interested in this particular video is not because of what I said. It's where I said it, in my shipping container. For almost 2 years, I lived in half of a shipping container, a 10 by 20 foot shipping container. And you will see, when you look at this video, the inside of my shipping container home for almost 2 years. It's where all the American civilian assistance providers stayed, in shipping containers. Now, it's unusual for the Americans to know about what civilians did abroad, because you always, particularly in war-torn countries, you always hear about the military. But I decided, while in Afghanistan, to write a pictorial account of my life and work in Afghanistan. And if you see clicking here, you'll be able to read and see photos of what life was like for us. The second page, Rule of Law Projects, is really the essence of my website. It lists all of the work I engaged in the rule of law. On the left side is the text and the content of the work I did. On the right side, photographs, which I will go back to. But here it says Rule of Law Project, and these are categories, large categories of rule of law projects I engaged in, as well as the same projects that other attorneys who are here who have worked overseas have done. And these are categories, so these large categories: rule of law assessments and evaluations, anti-corruption assessments, judicial system strategic plans, legal and judicial education program assessments, and of course it goes down. But once you see a category that may interest you, you click on the downward arrow, and then you see a list of countries in alphabetical order of where I worked using that large category, and specifically what I did in each country. So there's Algeria, Bangladesh, Bulgaria, Georgia, Jordan, Kosovo, and so on. Now the photos. There's 3 photos that I like very much on this page. This one, if you see, Chief Justice Rehnquist in Varna, Bulgaria. Well, one day I was having a meeting with the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Bulgaria, and he told me that he had invited Chief Justice Rehnquist to Bulgaria, to Sofia. Well, I thought, oh, this would be an excellent opportunity for Justice Rehnquist to come to Varna, because I had been working for many months with several Bulgarian women judges to create a legal and judicial training center for judges. And we were going to open the center that was going to be located in Varna in a couple months. And I thought it would be a perfect opportunity for Chief Justice Rehnquist to give the opening speech. So I went from the Supreme Court to the U.S. Embassy and asked to see Ambassador Bill Montgomery. Now, at that time in the early 90s, and hopefully later in other countries, but ABA Sealy, U.S. Embassy, and USAID worked seamlessly. So I could easily go to the embassy and talk to the ambassador, Bill Montgomery. And I told him why I wanted to have Chief Justice Rehnquist come to Varna after I told him he was going to be coming to Sofia. And I asked him what he thought about the idea, and he said, "Oh, Mary Noel, you're never going to get the Chief Justice of the United States to fly to Varna." Well, I was the last person he should have said that to. So I contacted ABA Sealy. ABA Sealy contacted the State Department. The State Department contacted the Supreme Court, and look where we are, in Varna. Now, why did I think our Chief Justice would be that interested in coming to Varna? We flew in a helicopter together all across the country. And it's because the 4 of us, these other 2 men were ABA Sealy lawyers as well, we were all trained here as lawyers, American lawyers. And while Chief Justice Rehnquist had a very senior title, and we're just lawyers, country lawyers, we had a common bond. It didn't matter what politics we had, what our political party was. It didn't matter, because our common bond was the law. The law prevails. And we were there, all of us, to ensure that all of these former communist countries abided by the rule of law. And this was one of the highlights because I just felt like it didn't matter your status in the United States as an American lawyer. We all had the same commitment to the rule of law. The other photo here is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court of Latvia. Here is the president of the Judges Association. This is my assistant. She was an attorney, and I can assure you she was always a step ahead of me. But the four of us created the Latvian Judicial Training Center. And it's one of the proud achievements of ABA Sealy, because these were two nonprofit organizations we worked to create. And today they still survive, but survive as governmental institutions. And they've had a major impact on the judiciary in each of those two countries. Now, I'm going to slowly scroll down so you can just see the kind of photos that are on the website, the people I worked with, different countries. Of course, this is Justice O'Connor. I met her in Bulgaria in the very beginning. Oh, and here is Nancy Pelosi. We're in San Francisco. You know her. She came to Afghanistan while I was working there, and we're both on our way to a rule of law conference. But this is the photo I really like, because you can see this sign, USAID, where we had to put that up on every conference, every workshop we conducted in any country we were where USAID provided funds. And why I like this, it says United States Agency for International Development, not the American government, not United States of America. It was from the American people. And that's what USAID was all about, people to people across the world. This third page, countries, has the same content as the Rule of Law Projects page. It's just organized by countries. So off to the left, you can, it's a very long list of countries, but you can click on a country like Afghanistan, and I say specifically what I did in Afghanistan regarding the rule of law. The reason I'm showing you this, presentations and publications, is because USAID and the American government did not do this work alone. We worked in collaboration with foreign assistance providers from many other countries, the Dutch, the Canadians, the French, the British, the Germans. It was really a wonderful time to work together because we all had the same goal, developing democratic countries. Also, we worked with international organizations, the World Bank, United Nations Development Program, OSCE. And the reason you see me here speaking is these are photographs that represent my speaking at conferences where they were organized by collaboration of different sponsors. Now, I'm just going to go down one thing I think. If you liked that photo in the beginning of Justice O'Connor and me in Mongolia, well, I wrote an essay about it. And you can see here, it's called Riding Camels in Mongolia with Justice Sandra Day O'Connor, A Journey of Friendship and the Rule of Law. And just a few months ago, the ABA Journal published it. Thank you, thank you. I'm very pleased. But I'm going to go back. I hope I get through this, to these two photos. This is how I'm going to end today. So this is outside of my shipping container. This is winter in Afghanistan, and you can see how the length of these shipping containers, actually this is the whole shipping container, but my shipping container just starts right here. And I decided when spring began that I should plant birdseed in this bird feeder, which you cannot see, but there is a little bird feeder. And the reason why I wanted to, I spent a lot of my time inside my shipping container working. I had a desk, my computer, and I thought, oh, wouldn't it be nice to hear the birds chirp while I'm working? So spring came, and my sister, my dear sister, sent lots of birdseed for my bird feeder. So I put the birdseed in the bird feeder, and I waited for the birds that were flying all around to come to my bird feeder. But no one came. No bird came. So one day, my friends and I at the embassy, well, we decided to put birdseed on this walkway. And because there were 400 shipping containers there, we also had perpendicular walkways. So birdseed was up and down walkway, perpendicular. Birdseed was even on the sandbags. We wanted the birds to get up the sandbags to my bird feeder. But, it was a joke. We were laughing. So spring finally, after a couple weeks, 3 weeks or so. Sunflower seeds. Sunflower seeds up and down the alleys. This one you can see is a little high there. Well, they got to 15 feet or higher. This is just the beginning. Sunflowers were growing out of the sandbags. Yeah, so I love this photo because it really represents, the sunflowers symbolizes hope. And this really represents, I think, the sunflowers, the hope I have for America. And I hope you leave here today recognizing that preserving our democracy, the rule of law, and the independence of our judiciary matters more than any political differences that divide us. Thank you.